Hey, this is Tiger, and once more I did not manage to capture the intro, but this does not matter. Thank you very much for joining my stream. Good evening. AJ, hey, great to see you in the chat. Thank you for moderating. At least I managed to get the disclaimer broadcasted, so please don't forget that we are talking about playing a computer game here, not driving real trains, and leave the real train stuff and the railway infrastructure alone so that they don't get disturbed and no safety issues arise. What I wanted to do today is to play some American freight. We have been doing a lot of German stuff. We have been doing a lot of English stuff in between. Also the steam engines that we had were English ones. So I think it is time to go back to the United States of America and look at some Union Pacific cab signaling. For that, we pick up the Sherman Hill route. That was the Frenchies. Yeah, we have you say that on the chat. The French signaling and the French safety systems. Yeah, we have been doing this as well. It's true. And unfortunately, there is not more French content to go on with it, because I really liked doing it and I enjoyed it very much. But also, I enjoy very much driving US freight, and for that, we pick up our freight service. I think I wanted to do this Hermosa to Cheyenne grain. Yeah, when we were doing Sherman Hill last time, we just drove from Laramie up to Hermosa, and then we stopped there because it takes some time anyway, and now we are going the rest from Hermosa to Cheyenne Yard. We have a 15,000 ton grain train, 106 cars. That means we have most probably 6 locomotives and 100 covered hopper cars, a length of 6,500 feet, and we are starting at Hermosa. We obviously came the new line, and the first thing that we can see is that after the rework that has been done to the lighting in this DLC, the signals cannot be read so easily. So this is obviously a yellow light underneath a red one. What is a diverging approach signal in the Union Pacific route signaling system? But anyway, we have to set up our train, insert the reverser handle, engine run, generator field, fuel pump, set the headlights to bright. Then we have to make the MFD a bit brighter so that we can see it. What is happening here? Why is our train running away? Interesting enough. Maybe we should at least have the opportunity to cut in our brakes. Well, I guess this is the problem with preloading the brake pipe so that it does not take so long to release the brakes. At least we managed to stop here at this point. Full application on the independent brake. The automatic brakes, I did not want to fully apply them, so we don't have to wait all the time for them to release. Banking com, not forget this. And then here, let's turn on the cab signals so that we can actually see them, even if they are notoriously broken. Yellow flashing, yeah, it turned to yellow flashing after a while. Now it is flashing. Now we have an diverging advanced approach instead of the diverging approach signal. But nevertheless, after this bumpy start with the preloaded brake pipe, you can see now it is loading fully, but the train is held in place by the independent brakes of the 6 locomotives that we are running, 4 at the front and 2 more at the end of the consist. Now we can actually start properly. Our brake pipe is charged. At the rear we are at 77, so maybe wait a bit until it is charged at the end as well. If it does not charge anymore, then we will just go anyway. Let's tell the dispatcher that we are about to start. It is still a diverging advanced approach. But that's okay. We have to keep to a limit of 15 because we are diverging across the switch here. Yeah, it is really hot here in June at Sherman Hill. So let's turn on the fan at least. If we have the windows open and the back door open, then probably there is no point in using the air conditioning. Well, you can see our cab signaling display unit gives us a restricting here at start because we are just setting out. And after passing this signal here, our diverging advanced approach, we should get a yellow-green aspect. We will get to this later in the presentation, but this is not happening actually. We are most probably getting a green one, a full green one. Yeah, it beeped and it gives us a full green one. So let's get our consist at speed. We are accelerating uphill. This is why our train rolled away from the start with the start-up setup. And that means we have to accelerate, not going beyond the 15 miles that we have to keep under for the switch. Still going uphill, and then soon dim the lights because there is a train coming from the opposite direction. As soon as we pass the summit, we have to still keep under the 15 miles until we have cleared the switch, and then obviously we have to accelerate downhill, but not too much because we have to catch the speed. So this here is actually a nice combination of a hill start, accelerating, keeping under a rather low speed limit because of the switch, grading, and during grading clearing the switch and then being allowed to go faster. This is what makes this DLC here really interesting. Even though there are not many stops and other things to do. managing the speed while going downhill, while going uphill, while grading. While using the dynamic brakes and the throttle and, if necessary, the air brakes is satisfying if it works out. Now that we are going through the tunnel, we are going across the grade with the tip of our train. That means in general more and more of the mass of the train is going beyond the grade, making it easier to accelerate. So as soon as we realize that the speed is climbing, I will notch down the throttle up to a point where I need to apply the dynamic brakes if necessary. If we reach the point where we are across the switch with the end of our train, then obviously I can accelerate more. Accelerate downhill with a heavy consist like this is fun too. Requires you to stop accelerating soon enough so that you can catch the speed before you go across the limit or beyond the limit. And that means always keeping an eye on the 10 seconds that you have to wait between notching down the throttle and applying the dynamic brakes. I'm not using my Excel sheet for the train length counter because I more or less know from experience when we have passed the switch. Now the speed climbed to 14 miles. That means I can throttle down. I like to keep it at 13 while grading so that I have still time to react as soon as the speed climbs to 14. This is the tip. This is the end of the train, and you can see we are still not fully across the switch with the end of the train. Let alone across the summit. Notch 3 was still slowing down. So back to notch 4 for a bit, and then back to notch 3. Cab signaling is still giving us a green light. I predict that at the next signal it will just go dark. Although it should be at yellow-green at the moment and go to a green one at the next clear signal. So, we are closing in on the first level crossing, and I think now we should be across the switch. Yes, we are. So we can still accelerate to a speed of about 35, I should say. When running those American freight trains across hills, grades, and downhill especially, it's always interesting to find out what is a safe speed for the train to go down a gradient. I might want to close the window so that I don't need to shout all the time. I'm not finding it for... And the back door as well. So, accelerate it to 30. Then I'm notching down the throttle. We are still going downhill now with most of our train, if not all of it. Passing the area where the Harriman undercut is diverging to the right, what unfortunately is not represented in the game, the third line. Now I've got the throttle to idle. I have to wait for 10 seconds until I can use the dynamic brakes. This is why I stopped accelerating even a bit below the limit of 40 that we have here. And then we can pump in the dynamics. They take a bit to get up to speed and actually slow down the train. But then they should be able to keep it at 38 here and even slow it down if necessary. Yeah. I think I want to run this train downhill at a speed between 35 and 40 miles. From experience, this is a speed that you can handle more or less conveniently. Here's the third line, the Harriman undercut, diverging off to the right. Another level crossing incoming. One of those that you don't really see. Starting at this point, the downhill part is over and we're climbing uphill again. So again we have to transition from using the dynamic brakes to the throttle. Not too early so that we don't speed. We still have to keep under 40 here. And then again we have to wait for 10 seconds until we can use the throttle after, yeah, setting the dynamic brakes to 0. And then throttling up, always waiting like 1 second between one throttle notch. But since we are going uphill with our heavy train, it is quite safe to notch all the way up to throttle 8. Another level crossing incoming. This one we can actually see where it is. And now we are on our way to Sherman Hill proper, the summit at the ancient town or village of Sherman that has been relocated since this line was first established. So now we are crossing the summit, not at the original point, but at a different point. But at least we can see the sign where we are going across the grade. And you can see the speed is still, or is already falling, even though I am on full throttle. So how to find out what is a safe speed for going down a gradient? Except from experience, obviously. I should say a safe speed or a convenient speed to go down a gradient is a speed that for most of the time you can control conveniently with the dynamic brakes at a setting of 5 or 6. At some point you will have to add air brakes. But until you get there, you should not go faster than a speed that you can handle conveniently with a dynamic brake setting of 5 or 6. Then you can cut away some peaks and still have enough room for managing your speed. If notch 8 dynamic brake is not enough at this point anymore, then obviously you'll have to add air brakes. Not too much, but also not too reluctantly. Because what you don't want to do, you don't want to go too fast, because slowing down the train that is going too fast is a scenario that will most probably end up in you adding too much air brakes. And then you will not be able to release the air brakes again, because we have single release air brakes. We would have to release them fully, and this can exhaust the brakes, we know that. So that a running release downhill is typically a thing that you should not do. So air brakes, once added, will stay with you until you are down the gradient. And since the gradient is going almost all the way down into Cheyenne Yard, there will not really be an opportunity to lose air brakes that are applied. So how, except from experience, can you find out what is a safe speed that you can go on? What I use as a rule of thumb at this point, I show you my Excel file where I log the services that I run in different DLCs, and the service that we are running at the moment is this one, Grain Hermosa to Cheyenne 1145, and we have a consist of 6 SD70ACe locomotives and 100 covered hoppers, giving us a weight of 15.5 thousand tons. And what I do, I always divide the weight of the train through the number of locomotives that we have. This is a rule of thumb thing, because the locomotives are more or less all equally powerful that you can get on those services. And then you divide it by 1,000 and you end up with a factor of 2.5 here. Other consists, like the manifest, have even 3.1. Lighter manifests like the Otto rack here end up with 1.6, and the higher the number, the more trouble you will have keeping your train from accelerating when going downhill. So this is more or less the ratio mass versus number of locomotives, and this is braking power with dynamic brakes. So with a value of 2.6, we are more or less a bit in the middle, and so I will aim for a speed of 35 to 40 max. With the auto-rack train, it might be actually okay to go 42 to 45. With the even heavier trains, with the manifest train for example, you should maybe go with 32 or 27 even. And this is how I try to get a feeling for what might be an appropriate speed. This is the Sherman Hill summit sign, and the level crossing that we are going over at the summit. And now the downhill part starts and will not end before we get to Cheyenne Yard. Obviously the rest of the train has to go beyond the summit or across the summit. So I will throttle down a bit, maybe let the speed drop to 32, and then I can feel for the train going into the gradient, more and more of the train's mass going across the grade, going into the gradient, pushing us down, accelerating the train. So I can throttle down more and more up to the point where I have to wait my 10 seconds until I can start applying dynamic brakes again. As predicted, the cab signaling unit, the display unit, went dark, and I'm afraid it will stay dark until we get to Cheyenne Yard and are closing in for the stop. So I'm already down at throttle 1, notch 1 on the throttle, and I'll go on idle. 17 seconds past the 8, so at 27 I can use my dynamics. 10 seconds are done. I can set up the dynamic brake, wait a bit, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the dynamic brakes will start kicking in. Another level crossing incoming. And at the moment I can keep my speed of 35 with notch 4 on the dynamic brake. We will probably feel more acceleration when we're going on. So we'll have to notch the dynamics up to 5 or 6 soon enough. We're approaching Buford, an area that can easily be recognized from an antenna that you can see. AJ is asking, where do you even see the speed? It's here on the speed clock. Can you see it now if I make it a bit bigger? Probably you cannot see it on your screen. Unfortunately, those modern locomotives do not have one of those big speed clock that you have on a F7, for example. You can't read that big speed clock because there is the handle for the horn hanging in the way sometimes. But anyway. So what I'm doing is playing with the dynamics to keep the speed at 35 more or less. So that our 15,000 plus tons consist of grain in those covered hopper cars does not run away, because that is obviously the worst case scenario, that you cannot control your speed anymore and your train is picking up more and more speed, at some point melting away your brakes and in the end most probably derailing. I have looked a bit into the rules of how fast a freight train can actually go according to Union Pacific rules, but if I will discuss this on the stream, it will be quite a longish and complicated stream, because the rules are long and complicated. There are different limits for the types of cars, there are different limits for the types of tracks, there are different limits for the type of cargo. So this is not an easy thing to do. And as a driver you would probably get a train consist, where is a document telling you how fast you can go in what section of a track. So not unlike the TOPS document that you get as a train driver in the United Kingdom, or a Fahrplan that you would get in Germany. Here's the antenna, AJ, can you see it? That is Buford. A town that is, at least in some sources, listed with a population of 1 person. And that has allegedly been auctioned and sold at some point in history. That's an ethanol train coming from the opposite direction. I still have to find out why those ethanol trains always have one covered hopper car between the locomotives and the tank cars. If that is for, well, insulation purposes, safety reasons, so that you don't have a hazmat car directly connecting to the locomotives, or if it is for different reasons. What is still a weird thing in this DLC is that the colors are quite different if you look at the landscape from the cab and through your cab windows. Everything looks much more whitewashed than if you look at the scenery with the external cameras. But yeah, we must have some sort of filter in our glass. If I remember correctly, now there will be a stretch of track where we accelerate harder because we are going into a steeper gradient, and maybe we will have to use the air brakes here in addition to full dynamics. At the moment, not yet, at least. speed is actually falling. Approaching another level crossing, doing my 14L pattern. Never forget to turn off the bell as soon as the leading locomotive is fully across the level crossing. Well, I can't help, I'm always impressed by those super big and heavy trains. Comparing trains of that kind to the freight trains that we have in Europe, this is a different league. 15,000 plus tons or even heavier. Has the characteristic of a freighter, a ship, or a tanker. So I'm afraid we're in the track, or in the section of track where the gradient is picking up. Already at notch 7 for the dynamics. Let's zoom in a bit on the display so that we can see what happens on the air brake. Indicators, as soon as we need them. And at notch 7 on the dynamics we still have been accelerating, so from 34 to 35, and with notch 8 we are not going slower again. That means we will have to add some air brakes. The initial application will lower the pressure in the brake pipe from 90 psi to 85, and oops, I probably want to go down to about 78 at this point. Not too much, so we don't have to deal with the air brakes. And the section of track that comes beyond, yeah, a 12-pound reduction was enough to keep the speed between 35 and 40 with full dynamics on. You saw that I bailed off the loco brakes, the air brakes on the locomotives, because if the air brakes on the locomotives are on, then the dynamic brakes lose their effectiveness. This is why we have the bail off function on the independent brake handle. So, and we will see whether this was enough or even too much air brakes, because I notched down the dynamics to notch 3 and we're not picking up any speed. Going across a little bridge. That is not a highway, this is I forgot the name of this road. Some local road. Red Creek or Red Rooster Road or something like this. Yeah, with notch 3 and now we can even go down with the dynamics a bit. Notch 2 on the dynamics and the 12-pound reduction on the air brakes. We can control our speed at around 35. Next landmark that we are going towards, I think it is the first underpass under Interstate 80. Oh my god, I forgot all the map details since last time. At least the interstate that is running from west to east. Getting you to New Jersey, I think. And that is more or less running parallel to our train track here. Yeah. The 12 pounds reductions on the air brake, bailing off the loco brakes, and now I can do the rest with the dynamics at the moment at notch 1. But we will get into a steeper gradient again when we are approaching the Granite Yard, the quarry. And here is the underpass for Interstate 80, I think. At least those bridges have shadows, unlike other bridges in this DLC. And we picked up some speed, that means I have to increase the dynamic brakes. The nice thing about managing the speed downhill here is that most of the time you do not really have to bother with the speed restrictions and the speed boards that are hard to read anyway, because you cannot really go faster than a certain speed. So in case anyone wonders why there are two figures 78 for the brake system, the left one is the equalizing reservoir and the right one is the brake pipe itself. So the brake pipe is obviously the reading that is responsible for transferring our brake settings to the cars. So all the cars will fasten their brakes according to the pressure in the brake pipe. And the equalizing reservoir is what we can influence directly with our brake handle here. So if we change the setting at this brake handle, we will change the pressure in the equalizing reservoir and the brake pipe will adapt. And why is it built like this? Because when applying your brakes, you want to see something happen at once so that you can stop applying brakes, for example. And the brake pipe is a bit slow to react, so we change the pressure in the equalizing reservoir and can see what we are doing, and as soon as we reach the pressure that we want to reach, then we can stop applying more brakes, and then the brake pipe will adapt to that. The switches that you can see up front belong to the granite quarry. That is on the left. And partially on the right. There is one really attractive service in the journey mode, where you start your train in the opposite direction from a siding here coming out of the quarry in snow and ice, and you have to do an uphill start and uphill acceleration in icy conditions with a very heavy train. So you have to really be wary that you do not apply too much power, or you will never be happy because of the wheel slips that you are encountering. On the left there is the track that goes into the quarry, but I don't think there is actually a service that uses that track. What I really love is the view at this point, where you can look down into the valley. I'm always mesmerized at this point, so I forget my 14L sequence, but not now. So, past the quarry area, we are approaching, I think, the steepest part, or at least the part where I always need the most in air brakes added to my dynamics. Still a bit to go. But between the granite quarry and the Otto area, there is a town called Otto, like the German Christian name Otto. I've never really seen the town itself, but there is a road next to us called the Otto Road, and there are some windmills. Bell was already off. At the moment the gradient is not that bad yet, but it will pick up, don't worry. Another level crossing, so we can use our horn. Bell is off. So I am almost out. On the right there is the Interstate 80, for example. Not that many cars running on it. We have to admit that. And we will pass it in the Otto area before we get to those windmills. And now the grading is picking up. Notching up my dynamics. And still no reduction. Can't hurt to bail off the loco brakes in between, because sometimes they are leaking a bit. Okay, Seems for now we are good with the 12 pounds. I can reduce the speed with notch 7 and 8 on the dynamics. Having some air brakes on also has the benefit of keeping the train stretched a bit. If you were only to use the dynamic brakes, then obviously only the locomotives at the front and the end do the braking effort, and that sometimes can result in the train and all the cars sitting more or less on the front locomotives. What can apply peak forces on couplers. So this is the next underpass for the Interstate 80. If I have the right number in my mind. And we can see the windmills on the right. That always tell us that we are in the Otto area. And again, the train is picking up some speed. And maybe at this point we can have the presentation about what this thing, our cab signaling display unit, is actually supposed to do. It is not really working, as you can see at the moment. It will start working when we get into Cheyenne Yard later, but not in the way that I think that it is supposed to work. This is why I prepared a little presentation to find out what it actually should do. And for that, I want to recap a bit the Union Pacific signaling system. What is a route signaling system, not a speed signaling system? We have looked at this in the previous Sherman Hill stream, so I just want to recap quickly what the Union Pacific freight signals and limits are. Obviously, they have a red signal that tells you to stop, a green signal that tells you can go line speed. We have the yellow one on top telling you you're approaching a red signal, be prepared to stop at the next signal. We have a couple of restricted speed signals. Everything that has a lunar white in it or a flashing red is a signal that tells you you have to go restricted speed. Also, this one with a flashing yellow that is a bit out of line with the other signal heads is a restricted speed signal. And even the signal that is all red but has a number plate, what is typically a stop and proceed signal, and most of the signaling systems that I know is, if you read it up in the rules, actually a signal that, if no absolute block rule is given out, a signal that orders the engineer to pass it with restricted speed even without stopping. And restricted speed in the Union Pacific freight universe means 20 max, and always be prepared to stop in front of anything that requires a stop. So on site max 20. The approach tells you to slow down to 30 as a freight train as soon as possible. Then we have an advanced approach indication, that is the flashing yellow on top, that tells you to slow down to 40 as soon as possible as a freight train. What else do we have? We have some signals that announce a restricted signal at the next signal, that is an approach restricted. That will be the approach yellow on top with underneath not the steady red but the flashing red or a lunar. At this signal you are required to slow down to 15 until you hit the restricted signal that is coming there. I have not seen them in the game, they are described in the rulebook though. And then the specific for the route signaling, the diverging signals. And my diverging signals in my signal system, in my signal frame here, always are on the have this blue frame with the diff for diverging on top of it. If we set down the relevant light on one signal head, so instead of having it on the top but putting it down in the middle or even on the bottom, then we have a diverging indication telling us you can go line speed after you diverged, but you have to diverge at the next possibility, at the next switch. Not telling you how fast you can go at the switch. That you have to know from your instructions that tell you what the maximum speed for this switch is. The signals only tell you you have to diverge, so you have to look it up and then keep to that speed limits. This is more or less what we did in the beginning. We knew that we had to diverge. It was not a diverging clear, but a diverging advanced approach that we got. But still, we had to know that at this switch we couldn't go faster than 15. And then more or less all the other signals exist in diverging versions. Every time we set back the relevant light by one step, one signal head. So the yellow one in the middle is the diverging approach. At the speed limits that are connected with this are the same. Still, you have to know if there is an extra speed limit for the switch that you are diverging over, and obviously have to prepare for that speed limit. Same here with the diverging advanced approach, and this is actually the signal aspect that we got at the beginning of our service. So we knew that we had to diverge, we had to look up the speed that we had to tier 2 at the switch, which was 15 miles, and we had to prepare to stop at the second but next signal. Also here, the speed limit that comes from the signal itself is the same. It wasn't relevant for us because the speed limit at the switch was lower. So what else is there? We have signals that announce us that at the next signal we will get a diverging aspect. So double yellow, top one, middle one, or top one, bottom one are approach diverging signals. Not diverging approach like this here, but approach diverging. Next signal will have a diverging aspect. And this signal also comes in a diverging version, as we have seen last time. It is a diverging approach diverging, meaning you are diverging now and at the next signal you are diverging again. So be prepared for that. That will be the double yellow on the bottommost, on the two bottommost signal lights. And then there are some signals that are a bit out of this system. We have a clear 60. That is a signal that tells us to go 60 at the next signal. That will be the approach over the flashing green. We have a clear 50 aspect. That is the approach yellow over the steady green. 50 at the next signal. That also comes in a diverging version. And then we have this signal, what is a clear limited, what is a diverging aspect in itself, and tells us to go 40 while diverging. So those systems, those signals here, clear 60 to clear limited, they are a bit special. They are not in the game. I have not really found sources for how they are implemented, and how the other signals that are leading up to it are set out, but they are described in the rules, and so they are here in this framework. Okay, now we know the signaling system for the wayside signals, and yeah, this is a limit of 40, obviously. And now let's see what our cab signaling display unit is supposed to do with it. If we look at our locomotive here, the SD70ACe, it has an aspect display unit that has two sides, the ATC side and the CSS side. And in case you wondered, those are just two different cab signaling and safety systems that are never used at the same time together, but there are tracks and sections of tracks that are fitted out with ATC equipment, and then you can run in ATC territory, or in other tracks and other sections of tracks, other lines, you would run in a CCS territory and then use this half of this thing. The Cheyenne to Laramie route is a route that was a CSS territory route. Why was? Because, unfortunately for all safety systems and cab signaling enthusiasts like me, all the cab signaling in Union Pacific territory has been abolished by the end of last year, as far as I know and as far as I can read from the sources on the internet. So what we are talking here is actually, just to let you know, you keep saying CSS. Yeah, it's CCS. Funny enough, on the display in our train, it is called CSS2, so I'm not the only one who gets confused with this. On the display unit, it is CCS here. On the display on the computer screen in the train, we can have a look at this later, it is CSS instead of CCS. But what I was talking about, all the cab signaling stuff has been abolished by the end of last year and has been replaced with a communication-based train control, or sometimes called with the name PTC, Positive Train Control, that is required since the year 2008 by FRA regulations, and so all the legacy cab signaling stuff was abolished. This is actually even, this is yeah, so not gonna lie, this is really old stuff. This CCS signaling, I think it was invented in 1920 and introduced on Union Pacific lines around 1950. So this is not state-of-the-art technology, but it is really old stuff. But it was unique. And now most of the freight services in the United States are opting for the ETMS systems, so electronic train management systems that are more or less communication based, so that all the information about how fast a train can go and anything else will be radioed in. What we know from ETCS, European Train Control System Level 2, for example, or some parts of the positive train stop in the access system, also by radio. And this more or less makes all those legacy systems and those specific and different cab signaling system die and get extinguished. But in the game, the Sherman Hill DLC was actually released before the cab signaling system has been abolished, so it should be there actually, and the locomotives still have it. For rail fans, rail fans, it is actually well, not a nice thing, because if you are in a certain territory, you want to see the locomotives with the liveries that belong to that that railroad carrier, probably. And with all the different cab signaling systems, it was necessary that at least the leading locomotive was one that actually featured a thing to read those cab signaling systems. And yeah, with every locomotive being able to run this communication-based train control now. A lot of foreign locomotives can run almost every route, and everything will be a bit more mixed up, and you can more or less encounter each and every locomotive from each and every carrier on each and every route. Well, but let's talk about how those systems actually were supposed to work when they were still active. The ATC system is a system that does not belong to our DLC here. Yeah, this is the unit that runs on the SD70ACe, our locomotive that we are running. But it is a system that was invented by the Chicago and Northwestern Railway, and it is on Union Pacific track, or was on Union Pacific track, more or less in the eastern part, east of North Platte, and yeah, at least I can say that as someone not living in the United States. So from my distance, this is more or less the area that this can be applied to. It is called automatic train control, and it is also a very, very old system. So it does not have to do anything with other more modern systems that are called automatic train control too. And how does it work actually? If you want to read it up, what rules are attached to it, you can look into the GCOR of the Union Pacific Railroad. It is under item 17, where the rules are specified for the use of this signaling system. It has only two aspects: a green aspect or a restricted aspect, red over yellow, and it switches between those two aspects. If everything is good, you have the green aspect. If there is any reason to go restricted speed, it will switch to this. And what do you have to do? If you are traveling faster than 40 miles per hour and all of a sudden you get a restricted aspect, you will hear an alarm, and then you have to yank your brake lever into suppression. You know that? That is a thing that is unique for American railroads, that you have a brake valve that allows you to put your lever into a suppression setting, and that means that you are suppressing the penalty brake, and you have to keep it there until your speed drops under the 40. You have to do that within 6 seconds, or you will get a penalty brake, a service brake that will slow down your train. Then you will get a different alarm, and they will have to acknowledge this alarm or this horn or whatever this train does. Again, within 6 seconds, or you will get a penalty brake. If you're not traveling faster than 40 miles and the first step is not applicable, then you will just hear the alarm, and you have to acknowledge it within the 6 seconds. And after acknowledging, you have to reduce your speed to restricted. That means about 20, 22, 17. Within It is supposed to be penalty brake. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is misspelled here. We will see it a couple of times because of copy and paste. Thank you very much, AJ. It is brake. So B-R-E-K-E, not the penalty brake. Penalty brake is always a good thing. You can rest, and like when playing hockey, you can get a penalty break of 2 minutes if you are overdoing it. Yeah, thank you very much for that. I will have to change this in my presentation later. Nevertheless, after acknowledging, you have to reduce your speed to restricted within 70 seconds, or you will get a penalty brake unless you keep your brake handle into suppression. So if you're going really fast and get this restricted, then you can just leave the brake handle into suppression if you can't reach the restricted speed within the 70 seconds. There is a bit more to it, but since the system is not implemented in the game, I just wanted to introduce what actually is connected with it. And it is a quite elaborate system, given the fact that it is so old. It also has a motion indicator that we can see in the game, and sometimes we can see it flashing lighting up and not lighting up. In the game, actually, from what I can see, it is lit up when we are stationary sometimes, and going dark when we are running. From what you can read in the rules, this would be item 17.7.2. This thing should light up as soon as the train is going 6 miles per hour or faster, and if it does not light up, then you should consider your ATC system as non-functional. Why is actually lighting up in our game here, since we're not running on ATC territory? I'm not so super sure if that is prototypical or just an anomaly. Yeah, this is the ATC side. Obviously, in our DLC, it is dark, and it is okay that it is dark. If we should ever get a route for Union Pacific where this applies to, then I'd be happy that if it could be, then yeah, if it could be installed, because it is one more system that would be great to have in the game. Well, let's look at our side. That should actually be working on our DLC here, at least given the fact that it is set in a time before the end of 2022. This is a Union Pacific specific thing. It is in the rules called the Automatic Cab Signals, ACS. It has 4 aspects, and it is sometimes referred to also as CCS, coded cab signals, or sometimes translated as continuous cab signals. Coded because we get it coded from track circuits, and continuous because we get it even between the wayside signals. So that is the idea. We're passing a wayside signal, and this thing just repeats the wayside signal, so that even if we can't see much around our train, this thing tells us what the wayside signal was that we passed. At least this is the idea. So there is a requirement that it should agree with the wayside signal that you just passed within 8 seconds after passing it. If the signals don't agree in these 8 seconds, then you should always go along with the more restricting signals, obviously, or on the side of caution. So what aspects can we get here? You can get a green light, you can get a yellow over green aspect, advanced approach, and you can get a yellow one, what is the approach, and you can get a restricted. Those are the 4 things that this aspect display should be able to show you. We will get back to our signaling frame afterwards, and just see at what signal should translate into what of those 4 aspects here. In the game, the only thing that we see is dark, green, and restricted. When it was first released, I sometimes saw a yellow aspect, I think. I never saw the yellow over green, and the yellow one disappeared somehow. So this is one thing why the cab signals are obviously not working in this DLC here. And this is, well, not disputed, not challenged. Everyone agrees that they don't work in this DLC. Just to have a look at the display units on the other locomotives, the SD40-2 has this old one that even looks more ancient, and it has 2 sides, and not to be confused with the ATC CCS version. This is always the same signal on both sides, so that the engineer and the second man can both see the signals. So it will always, or should always, light up on the same side. At the same time, you have some redundancy in case one of the light bulbs breaks, you still have the one on the other side. Same for the AC4400CW that we also have. Also here it should be the same on both sides. The problem is neither on the SD40-2 nor on the AC4400CW anything works. they are just dead. They are represented in the cab, but they don't work at all. At least I have never found any route where they do anything. So what are you supposed to do when the signals change on your cab display unit? If they change from clear to a restricting one, like this, from green to advanced approach, you will hear an alarm sound, beep, 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 beep. You have to acknowledge it by pushing this button here, push to acknowledge, lift for UPCCS partial cutout. This button, it's on the left, underneath the reverser. Within 6 seconds or you will get a penalty. Break again, please. Excuse my copy-pasted spelling mistake at this point. Same time, you can see that by pulling out this button, you can partially cut out the CCS thing. That is something that you need to do on trailing locomotives, for example, so that the cab signals don't run on the trailing locomotives. And when you're leaving CCS territory, then you partially cut out the system so that it does not interfere if there is no track equipment anymore. What happens the other way around, if it is going from somewhat restricting to a less restricting aspect, you will just hear a beep, not a continuous alarm. You don't need to acknowledge it, but you have to wait a bit. You can go by the new signal after the train has run its length or past the next block signal. Those are the two things. So either you have to wait until your train counter, that obviously does not work in the DLC here, has reached 0, or if your train has run its length by other means, and or you passed green signal on the next block signal, then you can accelerate again and you are through with your restricted cab signals. So this is what it is supposed to do, this thing that is almost dead and dark in our DLC. And now let's see how those signals that we have found out that exist in the Union Pacific route signaling system translate into cab signals. So obviously the clear translates into clear. Also, that is interesting, the diverging one. So you don't get the diverging aspects on the cab signals. The cab signals totally ignore all the aspects that are connected with diverging. Also, the clear 60 translates into a green, the clear 50, also the diverging one, and the clear limited. So those signals that I said are a bit out of the system, they all translate into clear. So this is nothing that translates to your cab signaling system. Yeah. The approach obviously translates to the yellow. Also the diverging version of it, and also the approach diverging translates into a yellow aspect on the cab signaling system. This is not necessarily so, but it is given in the rules so that you can prepare for the diverging. Also the diverging approach diverging. The restricted, on the other hand, obviously translates into restricted. Also the approach restricted translates already in the restricted aspect, and the stop signal, if you should run it, since there is no red lamp that can light up like on the PTS, the positive train stop in Access, it cannot display anything other than the restricted aspect. Could go dark, for example, but it doesn't. It translates into restricted according to the rules. So yeah, where is our yellow over green aspect? The only thing where it can happen is the advanced approach and the diverging advanced approach. This is where we get the advanced approach yellow over green indication on the cab signaling equipment. So now we have translated everything, and this is the correlation table, and this does not work in the game. Typically you start with a restricted, what is okay, and then you pass the first signal, and you always get typically a green one. If you are passing an advanced approach signal, like we did in the beginning, you get a green one. On the next clear signal, it goes dark, your aspect display unit. If you pass an advanced approach again, you will get a green one in the game. Then you pass maybe the approach signal, and you get all of a sudden the restricted right away. Yeah, that is my experience with the game. Maybe this can be fixed. Yeah, obviously the diverging advanced approach has always also the advanced approach cab signal connected with it. This is called the coded cab signal safety control system. Why? Because you have to acknowledge the switching to a more restrictive signal, and if you do not comply with that within 6 seconds, then you get a penalty break. This is the safety control. There are still, according to the rules, some locomotives, or there have been locomotives without this safety control. Then actually the second man should have asked the driver, what the engineer, what he is doing, if the horn was still sounding after 6 seconds after getting the more restrictive signal. According to the rules, I don't know if that still was a thing as long as the cab signals were actually used. What does not exist to the sources that I have found is actually some sort of system that controls whether the engineer is actually adhering to the speed that is connected with this cab signaling aspect, and if not, applies a penalty break. Apparently a system of that kind does not exist in the CCS system. I found one source from 2007 that specifically says there is no such a thing. If it was introduced later or partially, I obviously don't know. But I have not found any source that states, yes, there is a speed control system. So if you get a restricted aspect, you are supposed to slow down, and but after acknowledging it, nobody and no system will check if you actually do. In the game, there is a speed control. If you get a restricted aspect on the cab signaling display, you acknowledge it, and then you are still going faster than about 23 miles per hour, then you will get a penalty break. At least that is what I experienced. Yeah, but as far as I know, there is no automated system that actually checks this. How do we get the different aspects into the train? We do it by pulse codes that run on the track circuits. If you want to know more about how this actually is done to pulse code signal aspects into the cab of a train by using the track circuits, I won't go into this today because we have talked about this in depth in the Boston Sprinter streams and videos, and so I invite you very much to watch those videos if you're interested in how we get signal aspects into the train by using a pulse coded signals that runs on the track circuits. What I have put into my matrix is what I have found in one source is that the green aspect is actually a 270 pulses per minute signal, and then the less pulses we have, the more restricting the signal gets. So the 180 pulses per minute would be the advanced approach, the 120 pulses per minute would be the approach, the 75 pulses per minute would be the restricting, and then, at least according to this source, a stop signal would be a 0 pulse signal. So actually 5 different pulse codes for 4 aspects. What the locomotive does with the 0 pulses per minute, I don't know. Whether it switches it black, for example, this has still to be explained. The speed that would be connected with those aspects would be maximum 20 if it is a restricted, obviously, because restricted is max 20 and on site. If you get an approach, the wayside signal description tell you to slow down to 30 as a freight train as soon as possible. So that will be a speed limit of 30 with this aspect. For the advanced approach, it would be a speed limit of 40. And so you could connect controllable speeds with the restricting aspects 30, 40, and 20. And then, well, yeah, it is always interesting to know where you can use this aspect. Is it only for the advanced approach when you're actually running towards a red signal at the second but next, or whether you could use this aspect to introduce a diverging approach diverging or an approach diverging signal, so that you can go 40 here and then 30 later, or maybe even this clear limited could be announced with a cab signal here and then switch back to green. I don't know how this works or is supposed to work. What is clear is that those wayside signals should translate to those aspects that are given here. Yeah, that will be the presentation for the cab signaling system. What I switched in at this point, a few words about the speed boards. Speed boards that we encounter on this line should actually work like this. We should get an advance warning about an incoming speed limit with a speed board that looks like this: yellow with the numbers 2, one is for freight, one is for passenger. This is not surprising anyone. And then the numbers are on a white background on a yellow downward pointing arrow for the advance warning. Whereas on the execution sign, it will be without the white background. It will be a wholly yellow downward pointing arrow. From what I have seen in the DLC, in the game, we are only getting fully yellow downward pointing arrows. And if you compare it with the speed profile that you can see in the pause screen, then some of them are advanced signs, some of them are execution signs. So I guess they missed or did not implement the white background on the advanced signs that announce the speed limit first. So you never really know when you encounter one of those signs whether it is the advance announcement or whether it is already the execution sign for that. Typically there is a distance of 2 miles in between so that you can adjust to it. With this being the case, that the white background is missing so that you cannot really distinguish the advanced signs from the execution signs, it is hard to use those speed boards, and it makes it even harder that you sometimes cannot really read them if the sun is coming from the wrong direction. Yeah, then it is a good thing that you have to go slow anyway. What happens at the end? How is the speed limit lifted again? The most simple thing that can happen is a green board. What would be a resume sign? That means you can go back to the old limit that was applicable before. I haven't seen this in the game. What also can happen is that you can get an increase in speed limit signaled with a green upward pointing arrow, again 2 numbers for freight and passenger trains. And yeah, well, then at this point the old limit ends and the new limits, the higher limit, starts, obviously as soon as the train has fully passed this sign, has run its length starting at this sign. Or what also can happen is that you can get a further reduction, a different reduction that will be announced within the limit and then executed with a sign of that kind. So this is the speed board signaling that should be in the game. I'm missing the ones with the white background for the advanced warning. But maybe I'm missing something there and it is correct. If you know more about that, please let me know in the comments. And we can go back to our service and drive it home to Cheyenne. It's funny how I always press the alert or reset button when I'm doing my presentation so that I don't get a penalty break from the alerter. Where are we in our journey? We are in the Otto area, have passed the windmills. They are still here behind us. Dim the lights because the train is coming from the opposite direction. After the locos have passed, we probably can set them back to bright. Approaching a level crossing. By the way, if anyone knows, please let me know. Are we doing our full 14L pattern if we are going across a level crossing that is already occupied by a train coming from the opposite direction? Somewhere I read that in this situation we would just warn the other train by 2 short honks. But before I know better, I just do the normal procedure 14L, even though the level crossing is already occupied. So what will be the next landmark that we are going to? Going towards Borie, I think. There is another track that connects with the Harriman undercut. The third line. And at Borie there is actually a shooting range that is even represented in the game. So this is always a good landmark to know where you are. That's this dirt road to the left. Soon there will be a couple of buildings visible in front of us. And after the buildings, the shooting range will be on the left side, and we will see a third track branching out. Unfortunately, in the game we cannot go across the branching track here. In real life you can. The dirt road to the left has developed into a proper road. So the new skies, or well, the skies that were introduced with Train Sim World 3, they are impressive in a DLC that has an open scenery like this one. But you also can see that below a certain line at the horizon, the skies are just blue. So maybe we can actually allow the train to pick up a bit more speed here, about 37 or 38. Because the worst part with the steepest gradient should be behind us. Yeah, but maybe not too fast. Train coming from the opposite direction. There are the houses for Borie. Level crossing. And here to the left you can see the shooting range. Beyond the train from the opposite direction. And as I said, the third track. There was the Pride container. And at this spot in real life you could go to the right and connect to the Harriman undercut. Then there is this landmark, a bridge with a road crossing the tracks that only seems to connect the road to the left, the Otto road, with those three towers of whatever containers they might be. With a trailer and a little house. Yeah. And even though those services are quite long without any stops, by memorizing the landmarks, you can actually plan your speed and braking and stuff ahead. And contrary to some remarks on the forums, this is not just an DLC with driving 2 hours through prairie grass. It has more to it. Auto-rack train coming from the opposite direction. And as we can see, we're getting into a steeper gradient again. The train is picking up a bit speed. Soon the chemical plant will pop into the horizon. Here it is. What I like in the DLC is that there are actually some services where you can go from Cheyenne Yard to this facility, this chemical plant. Here's one of those speed signs. And if you look at the speed profile here, it must have been an announcement sign, because there is no reduction in speed limit connected with it. And still no white background. If we are lucky, then we will see one of those trains pulled by an SD40-2. With a couple of tank cars waiting at the signal. There are some lakes or ponds. There should be a level crossing. Now I actually need to be careful not to slow down too much. In case you ever want to perform a running release, this might actually be a stretch of track where it can work before you go into Cheyenne Yard. There is something in the air, by the way. I always wondered what it is. You might have seen it on the stream. Now it is probably covered by our covered hoppers. There's just the train that I was talking about, two SD40-2s with a cutoff tank cars waiting at the exit signal for us to pass. And later we might be able to see them coming into Cheyenne Yard. So, as you can see on this, the Harriman undercut is coming in soon, and then we are already almost at Cheyenne Yard. Soon we will see the highway bridge. And then we can prepare for slowing our train down. On the horizon you can already see the highway bridge. I think it is a different highway now, I forgot the number. But one that is running from north to south. Got to use the dynamic brakes a bit because the train is picking up speed still. Now the third line is coming in. And when driving into Cheyenne Yard, then our display, our cab signal display unit will come to life. Again, an advanced speed sign without the white background. Maybe the last clear signal that we're getting. Otto Road to the left has matured to a big highway. But what you can see is that even now, since we are almost, or now that we are almost at Cheyenne Yard and have the air brakes on with a reduction of 12 pounds, the train is still accelerating if I don't use at least some dynamic brakes. So the gradient is almost pushing us into the yard. When entering the yard there will be a 35 limit. I think it will be announced here. The 15 is most probably for a diverging track to the right. And I guess at the next signal bridge we should get an advanced approach signal. A flashing yellow on top. Yep. What should translate into yellow over green. Oh, I missed this one here. But we get a green signal that we need to acknowledge on our display unit instead, what is most probably not correct. This bridge here, if I'm not mistaken and miscounted, the bridge was not a road bridge but a railway bridge with tracks belonging to BNSF. And going further on there is, I think, a connector where in real life you can go diverging to the left and pass over to the BNSF tracks. So maybe I will want to use my dynamics to slow down the train. That we are not faster than 20 when we get to the approach signal, and then I will try to slow down the train in a way that I can apply some throttle in the end to stretch the train before it actually comes to a standstill in front of the red signal at the end of the yard. Okay, so slow down enough. Maybe even a bit too much, we will see. We will see where those 12 pounds will slow us down. Remove the dynamics at this point. Can dim the lights when entering the yard, especially since there is a different train waiting at the signals for departure. You can see that we are more or less on the last mile, 3,000 feet. And there is the approach signal. And our cab signal will most probably jump to the restricted here at the approach. Yes. Acknowledged. Now the 12 pounds reduction on the air brakes actually slow our train down. So at some point I will have to throttle up a bit. What I can do, the 10 seconds wait are over. This is the yard area with the turntable. Can already see the signals where we have to stop. To find out, maybe we actually need a bit more in air brakes, but maybe it just works out. I just want, like, to get close to the signal with a speed of maybe 3 miles. So that I can stretch my train and then throttle down, and then the air brakes will stop us. So if power braking, not more than throttle 2 or 3. At least this is what I read. Nice that the auto train started. Last 100 feet. Stretching the train. Towards the red signal, and they want us to go really close to that red signal. Last 50 feet. And now I let the brakes do its spell, or their spell. And they brake us to 10 feet, 500 points. Okay, that's it for the service. Yeah, you can see in the speed line we're almost stayed true to our 35 miles per hour. Never exceeded the limit and stopped in front of the red signal for 500 points. The appeal, obviously, is in managing the speed with the different brake systems. I like that, and I love this DLC. It's one of the great ones. Even though it is not so celebrated in the community. This is how long our train actually is. We go through a couple of blocks actually. There, the Otto train is going out, and I guess the short tank car train with the two SD40-2s is coming in. And this is a service that you can actually play and go to this part of the yard over there. And now I think the AI driver is taking us out of the map. So I will sit in the second-man seat. Signal switched to green. Did he not, or did she not release the brakes? You can release the brakes now. No, she does not want to release them. See, they are still on. Can I release them? Even though I release them, the game is not taking the input anymore. Well, then the train will have to go with brakes fastened, get stretched even more, even if not necessarily. Even if not necessary. With this impression, thank you very much for bearing with me on another longish freight service and stream. Thank you AJ for moderating the stream. Take care and see you soon.